The story's heroine, Kitty, came from an upper-middle-class British family. She grew up strikingly beautiful, trained from a young age by her mother to navigate every ball and social gathering with ease. Her mother had only one plan for her life: use her looks to marry into wealth, and in doing so, elevate the whole family's status and fortune. But suitors came and went, one after another, and Kitty never found a man she could honestly say yes to for life. As the years passed, all the eligible young men who once flocked around her ended up marrying someone else. Even her plain-looking sister landed a baronet before she did. Her mother's patience finally ran out, and at home, Kitty no longer heard a single kind word, only bitter, cutting sarcasm and blame. Right when Kitty wanted nothing more than to escape her family, she met Walter. He was a quiet, reserved bacteriologist who fell for her at first sight. He wasn't smooth with words and didn't know how to be romantic, but he showed his care in awkward, earnest ways. One day, Walter proposed to her at a flower shop. Kitty knew deep down that she didn't love this stiff, unromantic man. His world was all bacteria and lab experiments, a far cry from the balls, music, and social life she adored. But to get out of her house, she said yes anyway. Their marriage started off calm enough, and Walter gave her the best life he could. Still, he could never quite reach her heart. Kitty craved a partner who could match her emotionally, but Walter always buried himself in work, and every time she shared something lighthearted with him, she got only silence in return. At a dinner party, Kitty met Charlie. He had all the wit and warmth that Walter lacked, and he knew exactly how to handle a woman. He listened to every word she said. That long-missed feeling of being valued and understood swept her off her feet, and she took all his sweet talk for true love. Then one day, while they were sneaking around at Walter's own house, they heard the doorknob turn from outside. They both froze, holding their breath, staring at the lock. The knob twisted back into place after a moment. The door never opened, and all they heard was footsteps fading away. Kitty figured that even if Walter had noticed, he would stay quiet because he loved her. What she didn't know was that the person who turned that knob was Walter himself. A few days later, Walter came to her calmly. He told her he had applied to go to Meitanfu in China, where a severe cholera outbreak was raging, and he would be joining the relief effort there, and she had to go with him. Kitty refused without a second thought. Walter said, "If you don't come, I'll file for divorce tomorrow on the grounds of adultery, and I will name Charlie Townsend as your lover." Her affair was out in the open, but Kitty felt no guilt or regret. Instead, she begged Walter to let her go to Charlie. Looking at this woman who had mistaken a fling for true love, Walter gave her two choices. If Charlie could divorce his wife and marry her within a week, he would give her a clean divorce. Otherwise, she would have to go to Meitanfu with him. Kitty rushed to Charlie, convinced he would rescue her from this loveless marriage. But Charlie said, "I'm not leaving my wife." Only then did she realize that his sweet words had been nothing but momentary passion and empty flattery. Charlie would never give up his status and future for her. Watching Walter pack his bags, Kitty finally faced reality. She said, "I'll go with you." Walter replied, "I figured you would." After 2 full weeks of grueling travel, they finally arrived in Meitanfu. But when Kitty ran eagerly into their quarters, the sight in front of her sent her straight into despair. The place was run down and filthy, cluttered with dust and debris. That night, she didn't sleep a wink. Walter planned to give Kitty the cholera vaccine, but she defiantly refused out of spite. At dawn, Walter left for the front lines of the outbreak, leaving an armed soldier stationed outside their door. It looked like protection, but Kitty knew the truth. He was there to keep an eye on her. Alone in that empty house, Kitty found herself thinking about Charlie again, fantasizing that he might come rescue her. She wrote a letter full of longing and pleas for help, and to get it mailed, she pulled out a treasured record she'd kept for years and asked a local deputy officer to send it for her. But when the officer saw Charlie's name, he gave her a knowing, bitter smile. He said he knew Charlie well, that Charlie's real talent was chasing women, and that he'd even bragged behind closed doors about how those who threw themselves at him were nothing but cheap conquests. Those words shattered Kitty's delusion for good. She took back her letter and walked home in a daze. Kitty started trying to mend things with Walter, but all she got back was his cold distance. Then a plate of vegetable salad delivered by the maid became the trigger that set off both their emotions. The local water was contaminated with cholera, and uncooked food carried a huge risk of infection. Walter signaled the servant to take it away, but Kitty stubbornly pulled the plate toward herself and took bite after bite with a defiant look in her eyes. And Walter, swept up in his own anger, grabbed the plate back and ate the risky raw vegetables just as recklessly. They were both hurting themselves just to hurt each other, channeling all their bitterness and pain into that one act. Abandoned by her lover and frozen out by her husband, Kitty felt completely crushed. She walked out the door in despair, staring at the cholera victims lying by the roadside, and even felt an uncontrollable urge to walk closer. She wanted to end her life right there, but thankfully, the deputy officer showed up in time and stopped her from going through with it. Meanwhile, Walter, drawing on years of experience in bacteriology, quickly pinpointed the village well as the main source of the cholera outbreak. To stop the spread, he ordered the well sealed off, forcing the villagers to travel miles away for water. But instead of gratitude, his decision brought only curses and resentment from the locals. Even with the well closed, the cholera didn't subside. Walter worked day and night without rest, and eventually found the real root of the problem. The villagers had been burying their cholera-dead relatives right next to the water sources. Rainwater carried contamination from the decomposing bodies into the river, poisoning the water supply. When Walter proposed moving the graves to cut off the contamination, the villagers pushed back hard. In their eyes, those graves by the water were sacred resting places for their ancestors, and any change was an insult to the dead. But with the outbreak spiraling, Walter had no time to waste. He teamed up with local troops to forcibly relocate the infected bodies and seal off the downstream water intake points. These moves enraged the villagers, who took to the streets in protest, unleashing all their fury on Kitty as she walked home. No matter how she tried to escape, the villagers, who knew every twist and turn of the terrain, cornered her. It wasn't until Walter and his soldiers showed up that they held back the furious mob. That life-or-death rescue softened things between them. The next morning, Kitty followed Walter's suggestion and went to the convent. There, she saw devastation everywhere. Orphaned children scattered across the streets, crumbling buildings barely standing, and only the white walls of the convent offered a sliver of peace amid the ruin. The Mother Superior welcomed her warmly and told her a great deal about Walter. Since arriving, he had been treating patients around the clock, leading the medical team to develop prevention plans, barely giving himself any time to rest. The peace here and the hope in the children's eyes, all of it came from Walter's relentless effort. While touring the convent, Kitty saw children who had lost their families to cholera. They were learning crafts in one room, singing in another, still fighting to live even in the depths of despair. It was only then that Kitty truly saw her husband for who he was. He wasn't that dull, cold, unfeeling man. He was kind, strong, responsible, filled with reverence for life and a selfless love for others. Thinking back on her own vanity and shallowness, on the betrayal and hurt she had caused him, Kitty felt nothing but deep regret and shame. She finally understood that the so-called love she had chased so desperately was nothing more than an empty, fleeting illusion. From that day on, Kitty changed completely. She went back to the convent and asked to stay and help take care of the children. She learned to change diapers and calm crying babies, and in her spare time, she played the piano for them. Whenever Walter passed by the convent, he found himself stopping to listen to the music drifting out, and with it came flooding back the sweet memories of when he and Kitty first met. He watched her transform, saw that she was no longer the complaining, vain, empty woman she used to be, and slowly the ice around his heart began to melt. Finally, the two sat down and talked honestly about the past. They stopped running from their old wounds and finally saw each other for who they really were. After surviving the mob confrontation together, the distance between them disappeared completely, and all the resentment and bitterness turned into gratitude for a love they had nearly lost. They went boating on the lake, watching their reflections ripple in the water, soaking in the quiet beauty of the mountains and the warmth they had rediscovered. Walter also used the water wheel principle, channeling clean upstream lake water down through pipes, using the natural drop in elevation to bring fresh water to the village, finally solving the villagers' water problem once and for all. One day, Kitty was singing and dancing with the children at the convent when a sudden wave of dizziness sent her collapsing to the ground. When she came to, the Mother Superior gave her news that caught her completely off guard. Kitty was pregnant. But instead of joy, the news brought only fear and anxiety. She and Walter had just started mending their relationship, and she had no way of knowing who the father really was. When Walter came to see her, Kitty couldn't bear to deceive him anymore and chose to be honest. She said, "I'm pregnant, but I don't know if you're the father." Walter paused for a moment, then said, "None of that matters now." Kitty had imagined all kinds of heated confrontations, but never expected just those words. This man, always so restrained and reserved, met all her faults and failures with the deepest forgiveness. All he cared about was her safety and their future together. When Walter's water system finally went live and the villagers had clean water for the first time, refugees from downstream poured into the village, bringing an even more violent wave of cholera with them. That reignited the outbreak, just as it had begun to settle. To protect the children, Kitty had no choice but to keep them inside the convent. At dawn, Walter came to the convent, gave Kitty a tender kiss, and headed back to the worst-hit areas. Then for 7 straight days, Kitty heard nothing from him. Late one night, the deputy officer came to her with a grave expression and gave her news that shattered her. Walter had fallen ill. Without a second's hesitation, Kitty ignored everyone who tried to stop her, ran into the dark night, and raced to his side. When she finally reached his sickbed, the strong, upright man she knew had been reduced to a shadow by cholera. But when he saw Kitty, a faint light flickered back into his dull eyes. In his final moments, he used every ounce of his remaining strength to say what he had kept hidden in his heart. He said, "Forgive me." Walter passed away, forever gone. In the end, he never got to keep his promise to grow old with Kitty. But thankfully, the cholera was finally stamped out, and Walter had given his life to protect the people of that land. He was buried, like the refugees he had treated, in a foreign country far from home. When Kitty returned to the house they had shared, she looked at the dusty microscope on the table and his lab notebooks filled with his handwriting and all the tenderness and love she had once overlooked. All the happiness she had found and lost again came flooding back like a tidal wave, crushing her with grief. Many people say The Painted Veil is a story about a woman who committed adultery and found redemption in a cholera zone. But really, every character in this film wore a veil of their own. Kitty's veil was vanity and illusion. She spent the first half of her life living up to everyone else's expectations, using her beauty as currency, marriage as an escape route, and passion as proof of love. She couldn't see herself clearly, nor could she see the people around her. It wasn't until death and suffering stripped away all her pretenses that she finally lifted that veil and understood that in a woman's life, the only reliable things were never marriage, never a man, but an independent soul and a fulfilled self. Walter's veil was silence and pride. He loved Kitty deeply, but never said it out loud. He tucked his feelings into daily acts of care, but refused to give her the emotional connection she craved. After the betrayal, he armed himself with coldness and punishment, exiling himself with a resolve that bordered on self-destruction. Only after watching Kitty grow and change in the plague zone did he finally let go of his pride and reveal the tender love underneath. And isn't this veil exactly what we all wear in our everyday lives? We are constantly swept along by society's standards, blinded by false fantasies, layering disguise upon disguise to hide our true selves and to block our own view of the world. We are always searching for love, yet we often forget to learn to love ourselves first. Only when we see ourselves clearly can we truly understand what love is. What makes The Painted Veil so brutal and so real is that it tells us this: some love was never meant to last a lifetime. It exists only to show you the truth of human nature in your darkest moments, and to teach you the meaning of sincerity after you've lost it. Life in the end is a solo journey. No one can be your permanent shelter, and no one can lift the veil over your heart for you. Only when you stop depending on someone else's light and stop living in false illusions can you finally see life for what it truly is.